Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 795th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring R.I.P. Germain and Paul Gladston. We're thrilled to welcome poet Tilghman Goldsborough here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriches the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now it's my immense pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. R.I.P. Germain's practice traffics in double meanings, deep resonances, and a tension between accessibility and occlusion. Sedimented with layers dense with cultural meaning and reference, the extensive research undergirding R.I.P. Germain's work draws from multiple genres of Black experience, history, and culture, seeking to make art that is rigorous about his commitments and possibilities as a Black artist. R.I.P. Germain has exhibited internationally, and he has been the recipient of multiple awards for his work. Award-winning critical theorist and cultural historian Paul Gladston is the inaugural Judith Neilson Chair Professor of Contemporary Art at the University of New South Wales and a distinguished affiliate fellow of the UK-China Humanities Alliance at Tsinghua University. Among his many achievements and publications, he is an inaugural co-editor of the book series Contemporary East Asian Visual Cultures, Societies, and Politics, and was founding principal editor of the Journal of Contemporary Chinese Art. He's also a contributor for us at the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Paul.
Chloe and team, many thanks indeed. And again, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Gadigal land in Sydney, which First Nations land, sovereignty over which was never ceded. And I'm not speaking from an interrogation cell, just happened to be in one of the conversation rooms at the university, or perhaps it is in another time of the day, but never mind, we'll move on. It's an enormous pleasure to host this conversation today. Just a little bit of personal background. I was in the UK for a few months over December through to March. And my daughter took me to see R.I.P. Germain's show at the ICA. And I may not have gone to see it, not because I wouldn't been interested, just simply because of being busy and all of this kind of thing. So I went along with enormous interest, but I was absolutely delighted with the show and bowled over. I think it's a fantastic exhibition. I think technically it's two installations, one on the first floor, one on the ground floor, which are related to one another, as I'm sure we'll hear about in a moment. But one of the things that really struck me about the show is that it's not only enormously engaging in a technical sense and in an experiential sense, but it's really not a didactic show, even though it talks and explores some really significant social and cultural relationships. It leads with feeling. When one goes to see the show, one is struck by constant shifts in affect and feeling, which really draw one through the whole thing in a way which cements, I suspect, what R.I.P. Germain's intentions are in illuminating things within society and culture which are partly visible and partly invisible, and differently so depending on one's particular cultural position or even age, in my case. But I would really recommend it. If you're in London, go and see it. If it's staged anywhere else, go and see it. It's a really quite remarkable experience, a really great show. So I'm delighted now to pass on to R.I.P. Germain, who's going to talk at some length about the show itself and perhaps his other work. But then we're going to have a conversation, a natter, as we would say in English parlance, about the work and its cultural and social resonances. R.I.P.,
Yeah.
over to you, mate.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and I'd like to thank you and everyone at Brooklyn Rail for, even offering an invitation to speak about the show and my practice as a whole. It's definitely a blessing to get this space to, talk about what I do at length. And like you suggested, Paul, I'll start off from the latest iteration of my practice, which is the show at the ICA, which is called Jesus Died for Us, We Will Die for Dudus. And I guess I'll start at that title. When thinking about the show in an overall sense, what I'm interrogating is on a macro level is the society structures that affect oneself and how, oneself actually affects these societal structures and tries to bend, in order to survive them. And with the micro of the themes and topics of the show, that's how I'm trying to then hold space to have these conversations about these things. So with the title, that actually comes from a protest in Jamaica in an area called Tivoli Gardens, where a Jamaican drug kingpin called Christopher Coke Dudus was living, and the US wanted to extradite him for, drug trafficking charges. And what the US were met with was protests from the community that lived in Tivoli Gardens. And the title of the show comes from one of the, placards and signages that was made on a piece of cardboard by one of the protesters. And it literally said, Jesus died for us, we will die for Dudus. As he was a bit of a Robin Hood type figure in that area and had basically taken up the role of government in that area, and proved to be more effective than the actual Jamaican government. And for me, people had, have indexed on the title and focused on Dudus as a persona and figure, whilst actually missing what my main aim for the title was, which was looking at why a people or a community would actually then turn to such a figure like that in order for, seeing him as a better government for them to live under than the actual, governance that's meant to be in place and, look after them and serve them. Dudus proved to be a better figure for that job. So whilst using that specific example to look at alternative societies, alternative social structures in order to survive, I've then done that in two various ways with two installations, one on the lower floor of the ICA and one on the upper floor. And the structure on the lower floor, which you can see in the slideshows, is that of a retail space. But this retail space is a false front. And what I mean by a false front, it's there are a lot of buildings in London and across the UK which present themselves as certain things on the surface level, whereas if you are of a certain type of person in the way that you carry yourself or maybe culturally inclined, when you go into, I'm sure they're all over the world as well, I must put that disclaimer, when you go inside them, you find out there's something else. So the structures that I'm basing this lower floor on are fake retail spaces that double up as drug depots. And I'll touch on that further in a bit. The upstairs floor and the structure that is of replicating or taking a hybridity of, pardon me, is a Hatton Gardens Jewelers. And for those of you who don't know what a Hatton Gardens Jewelers is, Hatton Garden is basically the main jewelry district in London. I know New York has a famous diamond district, as well as like LA and such. And there's multiple reasons why I have paired these two structures together. You know, when using myself as an example, because of the way that I carry myself, the way that I'm dressed, you know, the language that I use, and you know how culturally inclined I am, I was able to navigate both of these spaces to their maximum potential. And what I mean is that both floors and both structures, they're one and the same thing, but just higher and lower, quote unquote, versions of the same place. So they operate in the same ways. So, you know, with these fake retail spaces, you kind of have to know the behavioral customs in order to, you know, engage with them. So I give you a run through of how to get into one of these places. So there's a fake spray paint shop in East London. What you do is, you know, you go up to the space, you can't go more than 2 of you at a time to the door. What you then do is you have to press the buzzer and then look up to the CCTV. And if you have a hat on, you have to take it off. You know, once you're buzzed in, and mind you, this is a reinforced door. So, you know, even though it's a shop, it's never technically open, but you know, it's there. It's hidden in plain sight. So what you do is and you're not getting out unless you're invited to leave. So, you know, once you go in, you have to go to the end of the space. The space that there's various spaces that I'm borrowing from, but this particular one that I'm thinking of, it's one of the most bizarre places I've ever been to in my life. It has sort of these fridges, you know, sort of like newsagents or / bodega fridges that would have like drinks in. So think of that type of fridge, and it has spray paints in it, and they're all illuminated. And then it has a checkerboard floor, and then at the back wall, it has a clothing rail full of fancy dress costumes. So I seem to remember a Snow White fancy dress costume, a Teletubby fancy dress costume, a medieval costume and such. And then once you get to the end of the room, there's a staircase. And what you're meant to do is basically stand at the top of the staircase. There's a door at the bottom of the stairs with a crack in the top left of the door, you know, to pass over what you're asking for. So sometimes whoever you're talking to will hand you whatever through that crack, or what they will do is they'll say, meet me halfway on the stairs, which you do. So, you know, when I did some reconnaissance to sort of investigate these spaces, I went with my friends, and then we waited at the top of the stairs. And for some reason, the guy asked me to come to the bottom of the stairs. Which my friends were upset about, because they're like, how comes he gets to go down the stairs this time when he comes, blah, 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 all this stuff. I was like, I don't know. So I went to the bottom of the stairs, and then I got a peek into his room, and he got even weirder. So it has like an acid green plush seat with a gold chessboard, and then it has a row of black bin bags, which I assume is full of weed or whatever. and then lots of Christmas tinsel around the space. Mind you, this is in like September, August, so it's not around Christmas time. And then a leather sofa, and that's as much as I could see before he came to the door and handed me what I got. So, you know, you leave after that, whatever. And the way you find out about these spaces is and weed cafes, which are prevalent in London as well, like in certain areas in London, there's loads of quote unquote for let office spaces. And I used to think for ages, oh, you know, these office spaces aren't being used, you know, why don't, you know, the council, the local government, you know, offer them out to the homeless to stay there periodically, even if they have to cycle through, people like actually use these spaces. And it turns out they are being used because they are weed cafes. So, you know, you're walking through the first set of doors, which look like conventional office building. You walk down a flight of stairs, and then you go for another reinforced door into this empty space, which goes through the same sort of social cues. Take off your hat, look at the CCTV, and then you have to go through this sort of bank vault-ish door. Once you do that, you go up the stairs, and it's a whole social club, like computer games, pool tables, you know, drinks machines, you know, the whole shebang. And the way to circle back, the way you find out about these places is through fake business cards. So you may be handed a business card that's of a landscaping service, or, you know, a dry cleaners, or, you know, a clothing brand where it's actually a drug line, or, you know, it's an address to these types of places. Now, when I'm pairing that with the Hatton Garden Jewelers, the way you also have found out about these places is that they also give you business cards, because they operate in a quote unquote old school type of way. They've always handed out business cards to people. They haven't sort of moved to the tech side of things, except as I'm coming to describe the example that I used for this show. And, you know, when I did reconnaissance for the Hatton Garden Jewelers, because I've never been to Hatton Gardens because I don't have the finances to, you know, enjoy being in those areas. When I went there, because like I said, how I'm carrying myself, they thought I was a rapper or a football player. For the Americans, it's a soccer player, right? And so what they did is, as soon as I entered the space, is they showed me all their VIP rooms and all the jewelry that they don't show regular customers and such, because they thought I had the money to spend. I wasn't going to tell them that I didn't, but you know. So for me, when thinking about this show, you know, it unfolded in a various amount of ways, because for me, you know, being a young Black guy, you know, you're in media, you're bombarded with this version of Blackness that you don't actually get to enjoy or be an active participant of. You get read as being as a participant because, you know, you're culturally aligned, where you think about music, dress, language, etc., with, you know, the prevailing dominance of like rap music and such. So, you know, with this show, I thought it might be nice to actually investigate this 1% of Blackness that, you know, I've never been a part of, and have a deep knowledge about from afar, and see what it's actually like behind the curtains, and to actually be a part of this culture for a temporary amount of time, and to also think about what it's like to be temporarily a version of Black, that, you know, you exist, well, at least I exist, you know, eternally being read in specific ways and having to adapt to those readings on a moment-to-moment basis. So, you know, the idea of that I would have control a level of control and agency in engaging with a Blackness that I want to be read as, and sort of manipulate for a temporary amount of time appealed to me, and this show gave me access to that. So it's funny to think about how art can give you an access to Blackness, right? Or a reading of Blackness. So it then sat parallel with, you know, the advent of UK drill. Now, with it being called UK drill, that means that there's an original version of drill, which comes from Chicago from the early 2010s. And, you know, UK drill technically starts in 2013 from Angeltown Estate and Brixton Hill in South London. And it's just straight gang music, same as Chicago. But it doesn't become popular really until you like 2016, 2017, to the point of where it's the zeitgeist music of this young generation, and to the point of where UK drill sound has permeated to the whole of Europe. It's extremely popular in Australia, funnily enough. And some of the biggest acts in, you know, that have been, you know, that have come out as being influenced from UK drill is like Australian groups like 1-4 and such. And now you have sort of Italian drill, Spanish drill, German drill, Russian drill, blah, 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 and all this stuff. But in the UK, it's pretty much the music of this generation. And with that has meant then a new found pool of wealth has been bestowed on these musicians, to the point of where this is the first time where the UK has a rap industry. Grime wasn't able to do that, garage wasn't able to do that, nor was dubstep, etc., and all the other subcultures that have been born out of UK, the UK musical underground. As well as this is the first time where, especially in a rap context, the UK has then influenced the US. So you have New York's Bronx area being heavily influenced by UK drill and using UK music producers, and one of New York's last newest superstars, rest in peace, Pop Smoke, took heavy influence from UK drill and used a lot of UK producers for his work, such as Yamaka or Jamaica. And for me, it's extremely important to discuss these turns of events in terms of culture, because for me, it's had a lot of fallout effects, you know, this newfound wealth in terms of, you know, on one side, you're seeing a lot of these kids who are in precarious positions actually make something of themselves and, you know, build up themselves in a financial way. But then you're also seeing the ugly side of things where, you know, guns are becoming more available in the city because there's more money to go around. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. And to expand it to my overall practice, especially in this lens, I've been interrogating the UK drill scene and the effects it's had on young Black culture in Britain for a number of years. Like one of the first bodies of work that I made was a karaoke series where I challenged the audience to sing along to UK drill songs as karaoke. And I knew at the time, the songs that I chose, that a lot of the audience that would be coming to the shows would know these songs and would know the lyrics. So my challenge is that, okay, all right, then you're going to chant these lyrics in the comfort of your own home. Are you going to do it in public? I know you're not going to do it in public because you know better. So let's discuss that know better. And, you know, with karaoke works, you know, obviously when you go to a karaoke bar, they have nice backing visuals to go with the lyrics. So what I had done is I'd spent a year and a half following all the gangs in London on their social media accounts, on their Twitters, their YouTubes, their Snapchats, their Instagrams, everything that I could find basically. And that generation has a completely different relationship with privacy, in the sense that they throw up everything onto their accounts. So any type of crime you can think of, I had footage of. Bank robberies, jailbreaks, every crime you can think of, I had footage of. It was a Fed's wet dream. And basically what I did was I encrypted my laptop, first of all. And then secondly, what I did is I made a karaoke collage of the footage that I'd archived and presented a real life version of the exaggerated and stylized lives that have been portrayed in the music through the music videos. So I showed the audience what it actually looks like, this scene, and what's actually going on with the kids that are involved in this scene. And at that time, it was in summer of 2018. And, you know, I started making that one collage in July of 2018. And by the time I'd finished making that collage in September 2018, there was about, I'd say, in the video, probably about 100 to 120 kids. By September, just those 3 months, 60% of them were either dead or in jail. So to me, it was extremely important to highlight what was actually going on in this city and how much of a state of emergency it was, what was happening. And people were really not acknowledging it, whether willfully or unwillfully, or just not knowing what's going on. But I didn't care about that. So, you know, where I've done that before, I've done various versions of this in various amounts of ways, but this show has a version of that as my latest iteration, which involves, you know, a white Tupac Shakur, which we'll get into in a bit. But I also wanted to bring Paul in to have a back and forth with, because I know time is pressing and how much we got left to talk. So I'll definitely, you know, offer the floor out to Paul, and then we can have a dialogue, and then I can index on that part of the show as well.
That's great. I think that gives a real insight into the particular show at ICA, and also its kind of wider relationship to your work. But let me start with a technical question before we get into the sort of resonances and significances of the work in more detail. I mean, you're using techniques that, you know, could be described as post-Duchampian, the kind of things that pretty much all contemporary artists use nowadays, one way or another, various forms of defamiliarization and found objects and installation, you know, immersive environments for the audience. I just wonder whether you could say, and you've alluded to this a little bit already in what you said, but I wonder whether you could say where that comes from. Is it from art school training simply, or is it broader? No. Does it relate? I mean, you mentioned drill culture, and I just wondered whether there are also strong resonances with the kind of collage techniques that are part of rap culture in general. Perhaps you could say something about that, those two things, the relationships between those two things.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't come from art school. I deleted everything from my mind from art school. I had a horrible time with art school, and I was very much stubbornly in tune with painting back then, which maybe one day I'll revisit. But, you know, it comes from call and response. So when I'm thinking of an idea and sort of where I'm at topically, what I feel then is the most effective way of, you know, expressing that pool of thought. So, you know, when thinking about, you know, that example I just gave where I made the karaoke, machine and series, you know, I was trying to figure out a way of actioning the audience to actually engage with the music that they were so in love with in a different way that wasn't just, you know, sitting on YouTube watching videos, or, you know, just listening to Spotify playlists and such like that, or like, you know, One Extra or Rinse FM or NTS radio stations. So usually when I'm making a work, I'm specifically keeping in mind what type of medium may be the best way of getting my point across. So I've made photography series, I've made immersive installations, I've made sculptural pieces, I've made sound work, I've done a manner of different things. It's really dependent on the idea. And, you know, just to sort of recircle back to the question that you was asking, it so happens with this show, I felt, you know, in order to investigate, you know, how cultural gatekeeping is manifesting itself in various ways in order to, you know, protect oneself from one, say like the law, or, you know, another way could be you have a lot of people that are POC that don't want to engage with the National Health Insurance, National Health Service, sorry, because of, you know, going through mental health issues, and they receive a lot of racial bias when engaging with that service and trying to get like the right type of help. So they may end up going to weed cafes to self-medicate, for example. I've met a couple of people that do that. So with these spaces, you was right to say that the show is led with feeling. I wanted the audience to actually experience what it's like going through these types of spaces, and what it may feel like to be in the shoes of another person that has to navigate through these spaces, you know, in order for various agendas that they may have. And, you know, with those types of feelings, it's not just sort of an experiential goal of mine where I'm seeking empathy. There's also elements of excitement. You know, it may be fun to go see a whole bunch of expensive jewelry that you never really get the chance to have access to. Yeah, you can go into Hatton Gardens Jewelers, but, you know, you're not going to see a chain that's worth 250 grand there, because they won't show you it, because they don't feel like you're the one that's going to buy it or not. So to have it right in front of you there, it's right there. See what it's like to see that type of wealth, currency, assets right in front of you in this very small object. It's a different thing. It puts in perspective of how, you know, society works, how life works, how, you know, the haves have and the have-nots don't. Whereas in other aspects of the show, I want you to feel about what it's like to go into a space that is just complete illegality, and, you know, the tension that comes with that. Like, there's aspects of those spaces that are hidden and you have to seek out. And if you're of someone that has been in those types of spaces, you'll know where to look to find these sort of things. One example is that there is a real AK-47 with a grenade launcher attachment hidden in one of the spaces. Now, the people that I know that have been to these types of spaces knew exactly where to find it. Whereas if you don't, you just miss it. And then you just don't even know it's there. You know, in regards to what I found with these immersive installations is that, you know, inviting the audience to become an active participant as well bridges the gap between, you know, the sort of hostility that comes with a gallery space, especially if, I use a blunt term, you're non-white. I know I have experienced going through various types of galleries and feeling like, you know, not wanted, or, you know, this isn't a space that is actually welcoming to me. And, you know, that's also an appeal of bringing these types of topics to these spaces and building them out in specific ways as a way of breaking through those barriers. And I think like inviting the audience to be able to do things like to touch, to feel, to like smell, and engage with the spaces in a way that you would in real life. It helps to hammer the messages and the thematic tropes that I'm trying to discuss within the work. I should double back and let the audience know that I very much hate gallery space conventions. So I hate the idea of press releases. I can't stand them. I hate the idea of telling the audience what to think about the show before they've even looked at anything. So for this, in a past show, I've done an audio guide before where me and my friend just walked through the show and talked about it. So, if you listen to it, it felt like you was walking with your friend and discussing the show. And with this show, I've provided just a glossary of terms because I'm not expecting everyone that comes to the show to understand what is going on at all. I understand that they're niche topics, even within the circles that they're frequenting in. So I'm not expecting someone to know what a bust down rollie is. I'm not expecting anyone to know what a weed calf is, or these types of terms. So that's provided. So the invitation is, when you walk through these spaces, is that you can touch, you can pick up things, you can move stuff around, obviously not going too extreme with that, like rearranging furniture, but you're left to your own discretion to live out the space as however you desire. And I've also produced specific smells for each spaces, because I feel smell is important, in terms of adding dimensionality to an installation. As a human, you smell before you see. So it feels a bit alien to me to not include smell within an installation. So, the effect of the weed smell in a grow room is added to by a scent that me and my perfumer, Ezra Lloyd Jackson, have made. And then upstairs in the showroom, the first room with the white 2-pack in it, in the cabinet, is the smell of money. We've replicated the smell of money. And then in the last room where all the jewelry is held, me and him decided to concoct a smell which we felt replicated the idea of success and what success may smell like. So when we've approached smell, we've used it in rigid ways and like directly replicating smells that are familiar to us, to taking loose conceptual approaches to abstract ideas of like what success even means to us and what it might smell like. So yeah,
I think it's interesting just to expand on the glossary thing. I think it is refreshing to go to a show which doesn't have a catalogue and doesn't have explanatory notes of any kind, really, apart from what the ICA put out briefly online. But the glossary is kind of helpful, and it isn't. It's very much dependent on your cultural, social position as to whether you can interpret those terms. I mean, you're giving them up very kindly as a way of navigating through, but it's still a little bit dependent on how much an individual viewer knows. So you're not really you're not aiming, I suspect, to create a universal situation. Hopefully you're drawing attention, the audience's attention to their own particular interpretive position, their own cultural outlook. And also, I think it's right that you had to be lucky enough to pick up a card with a door code on to get into the grow. Is that right? So if you didn't pick If you didn't have the nous to do that, you didn't get in.
No.
And once you were in, the door seemed like a pull when it was a push, or the other way around. So there's this kind of moment of feeling locked in, like, how do I get out? What did I do with that card with the code on it?
But yeah, thanks for highlighting that. That was definitely the aim of it. It's, yeah, I'm giving you a hint at the themes of the show and, you know, ideas on terms of what you should be thinking about, but I'm not here to hold your hand, you know, especially when thinking in terms of Blackness. There's so many things that Black people have to do in order to, you know, adapt to the wider white society, where we just have to learn on the spot. Well, here you go. You have to learn on the spot now and figure it all out. It's about experiences. Yes, this is based on your cultural knowledge pool and what you've experienced through life. It's the same for us. When I had to go to a weed calf the first time, I didn't know what was going on. I had to be taught, and I had to figure it out on the spot. And it's only so happened the first time I went to one, I didn't get beaten up because of the way I looked and carried myself. So there is gonna be some parts where you have privilege, and you know, you get away with things depending on who you are. Like I said with the jewelry, the Hatton Gardens jewelers, I got to the VIP rooms just because I just looked the way that I did and I carried myself a certain way. So, you know, it's a way of holding up a mirror of where you're gonna have to crutch yourself on what you already know. And if that isn't much, you're gonna have to learn hard, and it's a shark tank. So figure it out very quickly. And that's very much the experience that a lot of these young people have to go through when they're navigating through these spaces. These spaces are fucking scary, for lack of better language. They can be very welcoming and quite homely once you get used to them and people get to know you, but you know, they can be very scary and very dangerous places. So it's just another way of actioning and hitting home the cultural currency and currencies that I'm playing with within the show and talking about as well. Also, I am not interested in holding an audience's hand. I believe that the audience is not stupid and not idiotic. I believe that they have the tools to adapt and be open to learn. And you know, sometimes when you feel like you don't have much to draw on, that's a space of growth. So, you know, there's an offer in there to grow and learn something new. Just in the same way, I would welcome going into some arena that I'm not familiar with. I'm thinking, yeah, this is the time to learn and grow as well. So there's tension in the sense that I'm giving whilst holding back. But, you know, the fallout of that is then you're actually then forced into a dynamic of experiencing those spaces in a way that they exist in real life.
It's interesting because the ICA for many people would be a shark tank and a forbidden place.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a working class background, and where art and high culture was at a bit of a premium, not completely absent, but going, you know, at one time in my life, going into the ICA would have seemed very forbidding. But of course, I'm educated and privileged and have you know, entered into a career, which means that when I get, you know, I walk into the ICA, I don't think anything of it. It's the ICA, you know, I go in, it's comfortable. What you did, I think, very usefully was, you know, kind of subvert that comfort by introducing, and what it made me feel was that it reminded me of the time when I didn't feel comfortable about going into art spaces. You know, it reminded me of my own cultural position.
Yeah, it's interesting how that sort of brought that out of people, depending on who they are. Because funny enough, when I've spoken to young Black teenagers and sort of the security guards that I've got for this show who are young Black men as well. They've loved being in these spaces. I had a kid a couple of days ago came to me and was like, "Oh, I never knew you could actually do this as art. Like, this is crazy seeing like Quang face on a monitor and like, you know, seeing such and such and such song, and then you have this tooth pack and stuff and blah blah blah." And one of my friends who is an artist as well, he was saying on the opening night when he came, he was like, damn, he's like, wow, you actually brought the man them over to the opening. Like, these people don't come to art shows at all. But then there was a group of them, like en masse, there at the opening. So for me, that was heartwarming because, you know, it meant the people who it's meant to feel familiar to did find it familiar. And for those that didn't find it familiar, are finding it very alienating, which means that you're actually investigating spaces as they exist in real life. And, you know, it is a subversion because, you know, those same kids that love this show would not come to the ICA.
No, there's a
In other
tension.
sense.
You're setting up an
Yeah.
interesting kind of tension between
Mhm.
which aspects of the space you might feel comfortable with and which aspects of the
Exactly.
space you don't feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
Tell us about White Tupac. White Tupac sitting in a vitrine, you know, like
Yes.
Damien Hirst vitrine, and
Yes.
he's looking at a video wall of a rap
Yes.
parading around London in various places, you know, dripping with Hatton Garden diamond encrusted jewelry.
Yeah.
So what's his significance? I mean, I suspect that he doesn't have a fixed significance, but give us a sort of an entree about the possible significances of White Tupac.
Okay, so this show isn't the first iteration of my White Tupac motif. The first iteration comes with the mask of the individual in the cabinet, pardon me, and it started off as a photo of that was a replication of a real photo of Tupac in a business suit. So really, the White Tupac is a warning. A lot of people forget that, you know, just because you make an artwork as an artist, that then means every time you endorse what you're making, which isn't true. You know, the photo of Tupac in a business suit. So if I go into the history of that, so when the real Tupac Shakur passed away, there was a proto meme that existed of what the perfect Black man was, and it was described as Tupac in a business suit. So, you know, Tupac as a persona, he was this beautiful Black man that had charisma coming out of his eye sockets and pores, and, you know, was very much for Black love, came from a Black Panther lineage, really stood on his principles, didn't take no shit from no one, you know, really was about himself. And the idea of Tupac in a business suit was that he was all of that, but then could also flourish in the Western white world in the corporate sense. So, you know, I'm using that proto meme as an allegory for where I want to open up the discussion of what I feel like is the end game for Black culture within the Western world, which is usually a white version of Black culture. So usually what I do in a way to describe this is use music as an example. You have rock and roll. It starts off as Chuck Berry and Little Richard. You Google King of Rock, it is Elvis. You think about house music, you know, it starts off in a Black nightclub called the Warehouse. That's why it's called house music. And, you know, you go to a ton of raves, especially in Europe, and there's hardly any Black faces there. You'd have to go to Chicago and party with the older heads, the original heads, to actually get, like, you know, a lot of Black faces. You think of techno starts in Detroit. You go to a average black teenager, especially in London, and go, you know, techno's black music. They'll look at you like a fucking alien. You think about jungle music, which is a subgenre that arose in the early 90s in the UK. Jungle is now known as drum and bass. The reason why it's known as drum and bass is because the police used to shut down all the jungle raves and say that there was a potential for violence. So in order for the sound to survive, it had to strip itself of all the Caribbean elements and roots that it had. You think about hip hop, starts off in the South Bronx. You Google hip hop, who's the first person that comes up? Eminem. You think about now, even in terms of UK drill, it starts off in South London in Angel Town Estate and Brixton Hill, predominantly black areas. Now, who's the most popular UK drill artist? A white rapper called H from Manchester and a white rapper called RD from Brighton. And this is not to say then that white people have no spaces or place in these genres, not at all. They're all deserving of their places and they're the many talented people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's a trend where society picks what version of black culture gets to flourish and become the most successful and most visible examples of these types of musics and culture, and it tends to be non-black. So my discussion in bringing up the white Tupac is that that's how I feel, blackness, in order for it to survive or, reach its full sort of version of, flourishing, society deems that it has to be non-black. And that then opens up the discussion about, even trades or uneven trades in terms of like blackness being commodified as a product. And, what the trades, say these UK drill rappers are making with their blackness, they're having to perform these personas in order to make it in life. And there's very sort of limited spaces for black people to really make it in the world, and it usually tends to be some form of entertainment for society, when you think of sports, music, media, etc. So that's what the white Tupac's really about.
I mean, he's almost an inversion of Elvis, isn't he? Elvis, the white guy who sounds black on the radio, and Elvis, and the people around him extending rock and roll into mass media. And of course, in our own time, the whole issue has been about, as you quite rightly say, it's about how does one commodify black culture, which is now almost global, pretty much, and has been adapted in lots of ways. But I guess the white Tupac in part symbolizes that. One thing. No, please comment.
No, I was just going to say, and plus, I'm not the first person that's come to this sort of reasoning as well. There's actually a meme that says Tupac from 200 years from now, and they have him as a white guy. And like, that's how he'll be remembered in 200 years. So I wouldn't say that I'm the first person to think of this.
I don't think any of us are the first person to think of anything, to be quite honest. I think we're all adapting somebody else's stuff. But that kind of brings us on to the nature of this kind of economy that you're demonstrating in the exhibition at the ICA. It would be simplistic in one sense to simply say it's a black situation. I mean, it is. I mean, we mustn't downplay that. But I think what you're showing us is something which is visible, invisible at times, understandable and occluded, but it's actually kind of symptomatic of a broader culture and a broader society and a broader economy. The things that you're showing aren't siloed completely within black culture. They're now becoming part of a general culture, not even an alternative in a sense to mainstream capitalism. It's an intersection with and almost an affirmation, as well as a critique of mainstream capitalism, which makes it not only black, white, but also a multiplicity of other identities.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's where earlier on in the discussion, when I was describing my practice as a whole, I was saying that I use the micro to describe the macro. And, you know, I'm specifically concerned with Black masculinity. So I'm using examples, situations, stories involved with Blackness in order to then discuss overall societal structures which need addressing. So yes, you are right to you're right to highlight that point there and make that sort of acknowledged.
I mean, we're clearly living through a time of quite significant change. You know, if you lived as long as I have, you kind of notice it. But we really have kind of moved into a time of enormously precipitous change in the world. And the kind of things that you're showing are not illicit. There is illicitness involved in them, but there's illicitness involved in all sorts of economic structures. I mean, you know, where's the legitimacy and complete legitimacy in capitalism generally? But you're showing us, I think, something of this shift where, and to go back to the title of the show, where governmental authority and hegemony is eroding.
Yes.
Certainly the kind of white liberal democratic version of that is no longer has that dominant foothold globally or even locally.
No, and it's the show is sort of trying to highlight and address sort of the symptoms that are going on across the board on all levels of society. You know, I'm using very specific examples in a quote unquote higher and lower sense. But like, say, the lower floor is definitely not a Black specific, and fair enough, upstairs isn't either, because it's not only Black people that are involved in the UK drill music scene as well. But you know, when thinking about, you know, in terms of what you was just saying, you know, it's like, you know, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Could you just remind me of what you just said?
Yeah, I don't want to downplay the Blackness of the situation, but you are, I think, pointing towards this economic, cultural, and social shifts, which mean that, you know,
and that was exactly what I was going to say. It's sorry about that. It was basically what I was going to say is that it's equally scary and exciting, which is why I'm using UK drill as an example, because like I mentioned previously, you're now seeing for the first time where UK musicians have this amount of wealth, and you have, like, you know, the conglomerates, the Warners, the Sonys investing tens of millions of pounds into these artists, and they're producing music videos that Hype Williams would be jealous of, you know, where you have like a kid from Peckham that's rapping inside of a glacier in Iceland and rapping in front of the Northern Lights, or you have like a rapper from Birmingham that's shooting his music video in Nairobi and being blessed by the tribesmen there in one of his scenes and such. It's super exciting seeing where it's going, but it's equally scary not knowing where it's going. And, you know, on both fronts, the upstairs and the downstairs, and even when thinking about the specific title of the show, we don't know where this is going. I have no idea where this is going. And that's we're at a moment, or a tipping point of where it can go in any way, shape, or form. And that can be exciting if that type of power is harnessed in the right way. But then if you look at history, humans don't tend to do that, and it usually goes left. So it's also bracing yourself for what's coming. Because, you know, you think about the weed calves and stuff like that, is why do they exist in the first place? Because they're obviously addressing a hole within society that the community and people at large feel isn't being addressed. Within those spaces, I've met nurses, doctors, uni students, lawyers, police, even in these spaces. And funny enough, one of the experiences I always talk about is the guys that run it, the last week that I went to, they know I'm an artist. So they were asking me for decor advice on one of the spaces because they wanted to build it out and have it as a laptop station for all the bankers that are around the corner, so that they would stay in the space and buy more drugs and use their laptops while doing work. But they're all getting sort of locked down and such. So who knows what is going to sprout out of the fallout of that. So it's also with the UK drill side of things is that, you know, we have no idea of determining what is going to happen with this newfound wealth and whether it's going to really lead to liberation of some sorts or not. And yeah, I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed, but not too sure. And plus, because it's happening right now, I feel like that was super important for me to keep on talking about this stuff, because then I don't want for people to then look back nostalgically on the UK drill era and be like, oh yeah, that was a very scary and crazy time, but all these kids are dead, or they're in jail now, or they're long gone. And there's no entities or anything that were actually trying to critically engage with that and trying to like highlight the issues that have, you know, meant that this type of, you know, music scene and the culture that surrounds it has arisen from.
Chloe's giving me a hard stare because I think we're kind of coming up to our limits. So we need to move on to audience Q&A. I think on another occasion, I'd like to sort of discuss the sort of Englishness about your show. It kind of reminds me of 18th century romanticism and places like Strawberry Hill. But that's another discussion.
That's another conversation.
That's another conversation. Maybe they'll invite us back for part 2.
Maybe.
Chloe, over to you.
Thank you so much for that incredible dialogue. And thank you, R.I.P. Germain, for walking us through the installation and in such a generous and detailed way. It was really wonderful to hear you talk about it. So we have so many questions, probably more than we have time for. So I'm going to start with GE. GE, I'll give you the chance to unmute.
Thank you so very much, Chloe, Paul, and thank you, Germain. Is Jesus died for us, we died for Dudus, kind of a 0-hour take, making much more than a form of just precarious employment in life, making liquid the injustice of the here and now, how it postpones any reckoning with the temporal, spatial, and more often racial dispositions of all of us in this, quote, neoliberal progress.
That's a lot to digest.
I had to blast through that one.
I mean, it's a captioning of all the themes and topics that I'm trying to describe here. It's sort of you know, a snapshot and a cross section of what I'm wanting to talk about. You know, the point of where you have someone desperate to have their drug kingpin sort of be their overlord. You have to then question, where has society gone in this in order for this to be? That's the better solution than, you know, your local government or your government at large. And, you know, that's then where you see these different types of spaces that I've built out then. You know, this is where you're seeing two various different examples of people choosing alternatives. So alternative forms of, you know, self-medicating, alternative forms of, you know, recreation, alternative forms of, you know, displaying one's own liberation, one's own version of selfhood, you know, seeking out the niche in order to find peace. And, you know, with the title, that is very much a very hardcore, drastic example of people seeking out a niche in order to exist.
Thank you so very, very much.
No,
Love
thank
that.
you.
Thank you so much for that question, GE, and for that answer, R.I.P. Germain. The next question is going to be from Lynn. Lynn, I'll give you the chance to unmute.
Thanks. This has been Fabulous. I just kept wanting to ask you, do you think undercover work is a crucial component of your work?
Oh yeah, I very much straddle along the border between legality and illegality when making works. I've actually made work about undercover police and got involved with them in certain various degrees that I've had to evade. I mean, just from top to bottom, I don't exactly operate very much in the light, just through various forms of evasiveness. I mean, I use an alias to start off, you know, and very much existing undercover allows me to, like, say, when I go to a Hatton Gardens, being able to enjoy it as, you know, whatever projections being put onto me. And, you know, that's a very much a subversion of, you know, where you may have, like, you know, a stereotype being placed onto you, and then that means that you're then in for a rough ride. I'm then sort of manipulating those types of tropes for that temporary amount of time to get what I want, and not in a way that then reduces my own integrity. So, you know, I needed them to think I was a rapper or footballer, because then I got to see the inner workings of the space. And then from there, I revealed myself and introduced myself to the jewelers, and, you know, told them I want to make this jewelry. And then, you know, I think it's actually better if you partnered up with me and we did this all together. So the jewelers in the end worked alongside me, and, you know, I used their furniture for the spaces and I used their sign, and then they partnered up with me and, like, lent me a whole load of jewelry to display, and not just the one that I made with them, and it became a working partnership. So that's an example of where I've used a version of undercoverness in order to, you know, bring the best about of making the best work that I could make, but also a work that sits in line with the reality of being a person that engages with those spaces to the best degree that I could achieve.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that question, Lynn. That was
Thank you.
a really great question. The next question is going to be, well, it's a comment actually from Jeremy, but I asked Jeremy if he would like to pose it to you for your thoughts.
Hey, thank you. I was just enjoying your description of these the back room experience, and the back room to the back room, and the labyrinth, and the way in which people, you know, discover or need to discover things in order to get back there. And it was remarkably similar to what little I know of, like, backroom experiences at, like, blue chip galleries. You know, even down to the specifics of, like, I mean, blue chip galleries, they reduce everything down to, there's a super minimal, you don't even see the name on the door.
Nope.
But then, you know, but yeah, there is a description. There's a one-page press release. There's a description of the work. There's books about the artist, and you get information. But when you go in those backroom experiences, it's just the work, and you're expected to either know something or fake that you know something. You know, just there's a, you know, and then and it's a forced forced funnel. I guess
I'm so glad that you brought that up. So glad. Because that's one part of the show that I never got to really index on, which is the conversations I'm having with art history as well as the art world at large. So the room that in the upstairs that doubles up where the white Tupac is sitting in the cabinet in stasis is my expression of a free port. So, you know, the idea of where, you know, what's the idea? So with that space, I was thinking about, I really love in Regent Street in London for the winter Christmas displays, all the high-end fashion brands, they do these special displays of what products they've got for sale for Christmas. So they'll have all these conceptual sort of layouts and installations in the window. and I always like check for them every year to see what like Chanel's done, what Louis Vuitton's done, etc., etc. So I wanted to do my own version of that for Hatton Gardens Jewelers. And usually what you get with a high-end fashion boutique is they'll have a showroom. So I was thinking like, oh, okay, well, you know, what would the Hatton Garden Jewelers do if they had a showroom? You know, they would build out a concept. Okay, all right then. So what would I imagine? What could that be, and what would that then reflect on the show? So this is my first institutional show. So it's a big step for my career in that regard, in a very sort of straightforward way. But, you know, when thinking about the type of mediums I'm using high-end diamond jewelry, which I'm not too sure many artists done. So I'm thinking in these layers, and then I'm like, okay, they would come up with a buzzword for the concept. All right, then what would that be? Maybe take it to the next level. So I was like, okay, take it to the next level. That's what that reflects the whole show in various layers. Okay, so what's the most taking it to the next level of an art space? A Freeport, because, you know, that ties in with the show in terms of like the bending of law, because, you know, with a Freeport, these artworks that these rich people have, they kind of sit in limbo because they're technically in the country, but not. So they evade taxes, right? So what you have then is a manifestation of a Freeport, and you have the cabinet and the artwork sitting in stasis, being sort of a Clockwork Orange with the UK drill footage. You can't unsee it, which is a manifestation of the audience anyway, who are watching these music videos. You know, you're consuming this visual language, which has now got to such a stylistic and monetary level that it rivals movies. So, you know, and they're very involved with the language of hyperviolence. So as an audience, you're still consuming this stuff, whether you like it or not. So, you know, when you talk about blue chip galleries and the ideas of these spaces being sort of very sort of charged and loaded, there's actually a space within the show that discusses that stuff. So you was touching on some stuff. You was definitely feeling it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that comment, question, and thanks for that response, R.I.P. Germain. The next question is from Ty. Ty, I'll give you the chance to unmute.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, R.I.P. Germain and Paul, for this conversation today. I've been listening really attentively. I get really, I'm quite glad whenever things come up that I have a preceded interest in that I wasn't expecting to come up in a talk. So like, you know, I was like editing a document in the background, and then you mentioned Pop Smoke, and I was like jumping back to the window. So thank you so much. And I guess I started out with a question at the very beginning of the talk, and then it kind of like things kept adding in that I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about. But the two main things that I really wanted to ask you about were, one, you're talking a lot about the ways in which music acts as a subject for your work, and how you interact with the culture around that as you're thinking about the concepts that you're making work in. But I'm also wondering how the subtext of that music leaks in. So like what you're listening to while you're making, how the rhythm of that gets into what you're making, like the more physical aspects of that. And then separately, and I guess also connecting, you said what's going to happen with this newfound wealth, and you were asking about that. And I was thinking a lot about the like racketeering cases that are happening right now.
Yeah,
and
Rico
how
is
insane all of that shit is, and like these kids on Instagram who have just been given all of this money from their producing companies, who are given no guidance as to how to act with it, and are like being completely ripped from their support systems and given all of this power. And yeah, so I just want to hear you talk about both of those things.
Well, that's a great questions to ask. Basically, in previous interviews that I've had, I've described myself as being sort of very much in the mold of, you know, old grime producers or even hip hop producers like Madlib or Jay Dilla. One could only aspire to be as creative as those guys. But when talking about the idea of sampling, and you know, when I specify it in a very British way and using the grime bootlegger, so what they would do is they would take various elements of existing songs and really mash them up and make them into gumbo pots to then talk about or make a new sound. So, you know, when I'm making sculptural pieces or even immersive installations, they're very much hybrids of various points of dialogues, various aesthetic arenas. Like I haven't even been able to talk about the spiritual aspect of the show and how the stock room on the ground floor operates also as an Orisha prayer room. So I saw that there was one comment about duppies and they don't know how close they are to one main aspect of the show. But yeah, I very much build up things in the sense of how a musician, especially a sampler, would sort of architecturally take various aspects and cultural references and then reformat them and recontextualize them in ways then to get a succinct point across. And you'll find in various works that I've made, there's even titles that specifically refer to music. So I made a fake news agents last year, which title is Everything Relates Back to Drug Dealing, which is the mantra from a Benny the Butcher song called Scarface versus Sosa Part 2. And to me, that describes modern society with the idea that everything relates back to drug dealing. So, you know, I'm using those different various cues, and if you're of the cultural leaning to get it, then you'll get it, and then you'll see that there's added layers to the work. So very much music is interwoven within my practice on very surface levels, but also on very meta levels as well.
Wow, thanks so much for that question, Ty. And thanks for that answer, R.I.P. Germain. The last question today is going to be from Fong Bui, our publisher and artistic director. Fong, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, you both. It has been a delightful experience listening to you talking. Love your accent too.
Thank you. Likewise.
Last I was, you know, when I make portrait, hopefully I can make portrait of you one day.
Yes.
I do make portrait for the rail. I usually put on audio book.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
and last night I was listening to John Stuart Mill essay on liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm paraphrasing it, but he say in one passage, he said, the people of England think themselves free, but they choose what is customary in preference to their inclination until it does not occur to them to have any inclination except for what is customary. And I was thinking, because you managed to deploy both micro and macro sociological conditions, and the same way that you built your pictorial language, you just described so beautifully to Ty's question, orchestration, architecturally deployment, and so on, as an intonation concept in rhythm, you know. So, and I can't help but thinking, because it's political, isn't it?
Yes.
So just like what Hannah Arendt say, freedom is politics, you know. In other words, she's not saying freedom requires politics, but rather than the activity of politics is the arena in which your virtue or your talents are put to work in such a way as to make you most fully the free person that you have within yourself to become.
Yes, exactly.
My question is, it's very simple. You've gone to art school, you kind of disregard all of that academic thinking, and you undertake the body in action or action of freedom. Everything back and forth argument, you know, the whole genealogy of liberty or freedom has always tried on one thing, is freedom of action. And so do you think intonation is your freedom of action at this point in your life?
That's a great question. That's something I'm mulling over right now. You know, we all, as artists, we build castles for ourselves to inhabit, whether or not they become, you know, castles, you know, of safehood, or they become castles that become prisons, is left to be determined. At this moment in time, immersive installations appeals to me, and it feels like there's a lot of space for me to, you know, explore my ideas in a way that means I get to really interrogate my own systems of belief and challenge others' systems of beliefs and ways of actioning, and do it in a fruitful way that's, you know, building out very nourishing conversations and experiences. But, you know, that that type of freedom might be temporary. So there may be a time where that it becomes obsolete to me. And that's when I'll have to think of a different type of medium to express my ideas. But as it stands right now, I'm finding some sort of freedom in that. But the real freedom really comes through malleability and being able to move and shapeshift, in my eyes, and, you know, really sort of pivot and turn left when people are asking you to turn right and trying to force you to turn right. So, you know, I can only say that my natural inclination and my personality is my freedom, because I'm allergic to being forced to do another's bidding. So that's the best answer I can give you for right now.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Freedom as having some kind of option or an opportunity as a concept. So I think your answer is terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
This is great. I can't wait to re-listen to the whole thing. Believe it or not,
You and me
when
both.
you come back and re-listen, everybody sounds more intelligent, believe it or not. I can't wait. I can't wait to come back. So congratulations on the show. And thank you. Back to you, Chloe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, Fung. And thank you again for this incredible dialogue. It went so fast. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Tilghman Goldsborough to the stage. Tilghman Alexander Goldsborough is from Richmond, Virginia, writes texts, and makes other text-based objects and projects. His work has appeared in The Mall, The Leveler, and No Materialism, Volume 2. His book, The Western, was published this year by 1080 Press. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tilghman.
All right. Y'all hear me? Y'all can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. One sec. Cool. Yeah, cool. Thanks, R.I.P. Thanks, Paul. It was a cool conversation. I'm really sad I'm not gonna be able to see the installation. Thanks, Brooklyn Rail, for inviting me to read. Yeah, I'm gonna get to it because we only have a couple minutes. Let's see. So I'm gonna read, this is a new poem. It's called 23 Experiments, number 3, Sunview Passes. It's a detail, so it's like cut. I'm gonna read a piece like cut out of the middle. Blinding light, grape hole, looming over concrete beach, big island by old Rick, VCR, TV, 24-ounce surveillance, metallic taste of injured genitals, stood cross corner trying to create comfort, courtesy to neighbors, scarf neck gall, blank block swallowed in silence, swimming towards surface 60 miles hence, smoke smashing through windows, glass on ground, kinda yellow, orange light, blue taupe interior, chunky wood, booths not nearly enough, leg lock, light head, just a bit woozy, need to kick feet to pump life in the limbs, Will have to stand there, consciously keep myself alive. New image, early R month, year of Hair Jordan, black fascist with cottontails, empty-handed sweating, reverse of before, no longer, nestled in alone, trying to call comfort back vain, rather out front, shaking with blank page, looking at expectant faces, the silence before, thick viscous, molasses-like, king's syrup, loose and lying in the microwave with a fine fork. New 11, new image, flames, past, present, future, licking up insides, roasting guts and viscera, jumping from page voice to hair, feather, ear. Small sparks like baby embers start to catch in people's puffers. Set sun view on fire with a magnifying glass. Burn the place down with all us indoors. Saki pass, on the ongoing, the forever present. Eternal recurrence, same brings same, choice, result, surrounded, standing alone and sweating, cold, no relief but escape, looking for flight, ghost sensation, wings long gone, melted under foreign sun, by salt and system of preservation spices, genetic memory of form unknown, possible could haves, had not, the alphabet, XYZ. All the hitting with hands and beating with tools built for torture, bought and sold, handcrafted, hard to tell which is worse, capitalist machine for violent degradation or crafty people taking time to hand make own torture devices. Sunview, post sake pass, Naruto dripped in hot chili oil, sliding panda sake, stool next to cheating Australians, pork belly pushed toward melodramatic reach, grasp at torture devices, straps to spiked leather, welded collars of heavy metal, Marley chains rattling off manacles. Later image, cross-section of punch, TD era is the rearing back of fist, twisting of hips, turning with torque, buildup, what brings power momentum, later in time, actual connection, skin on skin, what touches flesh, becomes part of body, gravel from that accident, inorganic shrapnel stuck under skin, purposely forgotten, Pennsylvania, digging around in sharp dark, heart forgetting to pump, lungs filling with wet, stomach slipping through anus. Whole body clenches with childlike fright, wide world, big and tall, simple systems so complex, incomprehensible mystery. Universe glistening through soaked sponge, squeeze me, what's about to happen? Braced for imminent impact, anachronistic eyes spinning reels on repeat, disappearing into dark round hidden Cheshire grin. Sunview pass, XX-4, the flinch, involuntary motion, the world reaching inside and yanking on controls, even if only briefly, momentarily, to get at, gripping, grasping, somebody grabbing suddenly, without warning, you wanting, showing up after major disappointment, unaware it's been over, soon to find out. Indelible stench of wet rust, orange iron with calcium deposits, leak dripping, green, hot and cold, sour to touch. The flinch, a jump back visible, battle for control over voluntary motion, rocking forth and back on boogie balance board in suburban den, moment of contact, presupposing, guessing, projecting, an anxious stance, knowing it's coming, always open, the apple baked into culture, keeping you guessing on toes, ready to leap, never relaxed, able to tap in, simply fill a finite space in God body infinite universe, rather constant psychic assault, squid falling from sky, attaching to scalp, sucking experience and replaying memories of capricious brutality, still don't know they do it, from innocent time elementary cruelty till largely now. Breaking branch off tree, little give for less whip, a young layman's physics. Country so lazy love can mean, let me beat you so they don't kill you. Words are insufficient. You must feel. Learn lesson with your body durationally. A test of endurance. How much can you bear before you tap out off yourself, release into endless? Thank you.
What, Tilghman, that was amazing. That was so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us in this way. And thank you again to R.I.P. Germain and Paul for today's dialogue, which was absolutely brilliant. I hope that you all, if those of you are watching and you are in London, I hope you have a chance to see the show on at ICA through May 14th. And I'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation, who sponsor our NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and in our public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support our work. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation between myself and Mandy El-Sayyi on the event of The Amateur at Lehman Maupin in New York. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Emily Martin. And as is Rail tradition, you can all now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. That was such an incredible conversation.
Thanks, R.I.P. Germain. Thank you.
Thank you,
R.I.P. Germain.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Paul.
Thank you, R.I.P.
Thanks,
Thank
Chloe.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Tilghman,
so
for your
much.
reading.
Thank you,
Great
Paul.
questions,
Great reading,
everyone.
Tilghman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.
The
Thank you.
reading. Thank you, reading. Tilghman, that was amazing. Thank you.
That was so great.
Dialogue.
Bring the show to New York.
Yeah.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Get it over here.
New York
Good
next.
show, you guys.
Yeah, someone
Read
invite me.
Let us know when you do come to New York. You'll have to come by the Rail.
Yes.
Oh, definitely,
absolutely.
definitely. That
Yeah.
might be sooner than you think.